My guest today is Laurent Barbezieux. Laurent is the co-founder of Aktio. Aktio is a company based out of Paris, France, that delivers carbon accounting software and services to medium-sized companies in France and in Europe. Carbon accounting software has been a very hot area of VC investment in the climate tech space this year, and we dive into this today. We meet with Laurent to discuss the drivers of adoption of such solutions, the complexity of bringing internal data into one place such that an organization can reasonably assess how much their carbon footprint is and where it comes from, and the initiatives to reduce emissions that can then be identified and implemented. We will learn how Aktio helps them with that and get Laurent's take on why there can be so many companies in this space without directly competing with each other. A former strategy consultant with a passion for tackling climate change, Laurent started Aktio during the pandemic in March 2020, along with his co-founders. Aktio managed to reach a scale of about 30 employees without much external funding, only raising a small undisclosed seed round. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Laurent. Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Nathan Pomart and this is Loose, the Climate Tech Podcast. Every week we interview a founder and explore the stories, ideas, innovations and businesses behind some of the most inspiring climate tech companies that have a tangible positive impact on our planet. This show is designed to help you learn, instigate optimism and inspire further action towards addressing the climate change challenge that we face as a global community. If you are an entrepreneur, business leader, or investor interested in learning more about the climate tech space and how you can play a part in it, this show is for you. I'm very excited for this conversation. For Climate Tech Podcast, it was inevitable that we would end up talking about carbon accounting, which has been one of the hot spaces in the climate tech world this year. Looking forward to diving into it. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nathan. Happy to be here.
Amazing. So let's start by hearing your story. You come, I think, from you will tell us, but you come from the world of sustainability consultants. Is that the right way to put it? And then you decided to start Aktio. So help us understand what was your journey to starting Aktio.
Yeah. So if I want to trace the history of Aktio and why I started this company, I discovered the topic of climate change, let's say in 2005. So that's actually 17 years ago. While I was still a student, there was like a conference about the topic from a guy, our fellow French friends will know him. He's a guy called Jean Covici, and he was not known at all back then. Now he's kind of famous in France, at least.
Yes, very famous. Amazing.
Yeah, so,
yes.
And I said, okay, this seems to be like the most important challenge for the century to come. So obviously, grown up will take care of it. Well, 10 years later, obviously, we're not at all on track regarding climate change. Yes. So I did a business school, then worked as a strategy consultant on different topics in energy, telecom, due diligence for investment funds. So a rather typical corporate career when you start. Interested in infrastructure, technology, and energy. So I tried to specialize on that. But then it was not just sustainability, it was more the regular corporate world. And there was like this cognitive dissonance growing in me for years, where I realized that most of the time I was working on topics that were not aligned with this urging issue, let's say, till the point around 2018-19 where I say, okay, I have to do something on that. Either I move to a company dedicated to that, or I started my own company. I could not really find startup, early stage companies on the topics I wanted to work on at this point in time. Now I think that if I were me today, 5 years ago, there would be plenty of startups, but in 2019 that was not so much the case. And I did not trust large corporates because they have a set of constraints that make it super hard for incumbents to really tackle climate change. I'll come back to that. So I say, okay, we got to work on this. We need to reduce emissions. but we don't even manage to measure them. So we need to get tools to do that. So we need to have a SaaS B2B platform to measure carbon. So that's how I resigned from my company, spent 2 months at Le Wagon, which is a bootcamp, coding bootcamp.
Yes.
And there I met my co-founders who worked previously on carbon accounting. So that's how we basically started the company. So that's the whole story.
So you're saying I did not know which company to work for, so I started my own, and now if I had to do it now, I would join my own company. So it's
Yeah, kind of.
well,
Yeah.
it's well done. I want to ask you about the consulting firms that help large companies and medium-sized companies as well with their, I guess carbon accounting and maybe carbon reduction process. What's your view on the type of work, of the portion of the work that they do that potentially is productizable, maybe can be replaced by what companies like yours do, and the portion that is more really meant to be human service type of work?
Well, that's actually the core of the issue in our market. The way I would phrase it is that basically to make decarbonization work in the corporate world, you would need tools, you would need expertise and governance and people to make the job. So we can help on the tooling part with a SaaS platform that can automate part of the activities like data collection, some part of the analysis. Still, at one point in time, it's not like you don't just press a button and have algorithm and get net zero strategy, because you cannot train an AI on something that does not exist at scale for now, because you don't have a model for a typical net zero strategy, because we are inventing them today. So you need human expertise. And then you need people inside the company to actually do the job. And here, this last point in terms of governance, processes, getting people to work on the topic, it's very much a consulting job to have like a transformation program with a PMO, with different work streams, etc. So that's not very different, this part, from traditional consulting. So that's why we see like companies like BCGs or McKinsey, etc., putting more green in their traditional strategy and transformation projects. The expertise part, that's, let's say, one part of it can be a very deep expertise. That's why BCG acquired Quantis, for instance, to acquire expertise in biodiversity, etc. But it's like not different in terms of type of expertise as expertise in purchasing or supply chain or digital transformation. It's just a new, let's say, functional expertise, which is sustainability. And then you have the tool, the SaaS part, which is a software play and not a consulting play. And that's where, obviously, you have companies being created like ours.
What is the driver today of companies doing carbon assessments? Is it purely regulatory driven, or do you observe also voluntary, sort of going beyond what the regulation is forcing companies to do in terms of what's driving the adoption?
Actually, regulation is like the last reason for companies to work on carbon accounting. It's the primary driver that we see, especially on mid-market, is your clients will ask you information on your carbon footprint because your client is a large company and they already have the regulation. When you're a small company, you might not already be under regulation. Then you have like this. So it can be like now in RFPs, you have 5% of your grade on carbon footprint. So it's actually real money which is at stake. Then you have some other elements like private equity firms and venture capital funds asking their portfolio companies information on the carbon footprint because the investors, they want to be sure that in 5 years' time when they want to sell the company, it's on the right side of the transition. Otherwise, you just have a stranded asset that nobody wants to buy. Then you have more internal like HR, retention, and corporate culture elements that are also important. And in this picture, regulation is like the least important topic. With a few caveats, you have a few sectors like in automotive, heavy industry, where you actually have very stringent regulations with actual tax on carbon. But the average company, which is not under a heavily regulated company, they are not doing this type of work for regulation purposes.
And within the companies that you target, what is your organizational setup in terms of, within this organization, who is your primary customer? Is it the CEO? Is it the head of sustainability? How does that work?
Yeah, so basically we're working for companies, well, the typical customer is a few hundreds to a few thousand employees across different sites. Can be much bigger, can be smaller also. So within this organization, it's like the CSR, ESG, Sustainable Development Department, which is like a rather light functional team that is in charge of the topic. So that's our key customer. In industrial companies, they're like the environmental, safety, quality function, which is already in charge of these topics, and they have more engineering background compared to the CSR people who come sometimes from marketing or HR. It's not exactly the same type of skills depending on the industries and the people you're working with. And sometimes you don't have yet the organization, so it can be taken by marketing, finance, directly the top management, if it's in a smaller company, which is very much impact driven.
And so let's say you have, a company going through this journey of trying to improve their carbon accounting stack, let's say. When they come to you or when you start the discussion with them, what do you perceive as their pain points in terms of how do they do it today and what's complicated about it?
Maybe you have two cases. It depends where companies are in their climate journey. The first case, you haven't done anything yet, so you might not have a CSR strategy. You haven't done any carbon assessment yet. You don't have a decarbonization plan. So the first pain point is, okay, what the hell? There are so many steps to do. Where do I start? Shall I start with carbon assessment or CSR policy? And we say, well, you have to do both in any case. So you pick. There's no good or bad decision. You will have to do both. Just do one, then the other. So that's typically the problem for companies. Discovering the topic, you have a lot of things to do. So you have to set up your organization, understand what do you need. Do I need to aim for B Corp, or whatever? So that's the first issue, I would say. Then you have companies who have already done their carbon footprint assessment, and here there are like two challenges. The first one is, how do I get more productivity on the data collection, and how do I improve the accuracy of the carbon measurement? That's where a tool can help. And then how do I go beyond just measuring, but actually having things moving on in the company and having not just 5 slides on the actions, but actual investments and decarbonization actions taking place. So those are the two issues you have when you have already done at least one first assessment.
And zooming in on the data stack and the complexity there, one of the buzzword of the space is this notion of scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. Perhaps let's start with taking your perspective on, is that the way you think about how you help companies measure their footprint? Are you able to kind of help them measure those 3 categories, including the scope 3, which is for those less familiar with it, the emissions coming from either upstream or downstream, right? You can tell me if you have the same understanding. So do you help them with all of that? And is that the way you frame it?
Well, the scope 1, 2, and 3 might be something not super helpful for companies to grasp the topic. It's a very scientific definition of are the gas coming out of pipes that I own, or is it energy and the greenhouse gas are somewhere else, so that's scope 2, or is it something else, which is scope 3. But actually, when you're saying, okay, transportation, it can be scope 1, 2, or 3. 1 if you have petrol, 2 if it's an electric car, or 3 if you're taking a plane. So the way we try to organize these different type of emissions is more following the function of the company. So buildings, so you have the guy in charge of facility management. He has access to the data. That's his job to manage it. Then you have transportation and logistics. You have someone in charge of that. You have purchasing. You have waste management. You have product design. We think it makes more sense for companies to match emissions to their organization and the people who will be able to collect the data and then do the job of reduction, than sticking to scope 1, 2, and 3, which is more of scientific approach. So that's how we present it in our SaaS and how we work with our client.
We were talking about this before starting the episode about the fact that it's partly a data sort of connectivity exercise, but it's also still a lot today human data gathering and navigating an organization to find where the data is sitting. So can you tell us about this and the reality you are facing when it comes to helping customers gather all the data that they need to produce an assessment? How do you address this? Do you actually have a part of your business that is consulting like, where you hold their hand to be able to teach them where to go and understand their own organization to find everything, or do you focus on the software? I'm curious to hear your take on this.
Actually, we're doing both the SaaS and the service. Our mission is that our clients don't need the service the next years, because it's not rocket science, it's identifying data and multiplying it by an emission factor, and then you do the sum. So it's a sum product on an Excel file, in a sense, just the data is scattered across the organization on so many PDF and Excel and extracts that you can get lost quite easily, because you don't know exactly the level of detail of the data that you need and the emission factor that you can put in front of each data. So that's where the difficulty that's why you might have some difficulties when you do it for the first time and you're discovering everything. So the way we handle that is you need to empower more the different stakeholders in the company. So we have, like, in any case, whether it's just the SaaS or consulting, you have 2 hours of kickoff, not just with the guy in charge of CSR, but also the counterparts in logistics, facility management, HR, purchasing, so that it's not just a one-person job to save the planet, but it's actually the mission of everybody to this project. So that's really more an organization and governance trick than a technological trick. If we go down the road and in 5 to 10 years, there will be APIs, people will be accustomed to it, and it will be much faster. Still, if you compare to, let's say, finance, we've been doing finance for like 500 years. You still have accountants, you still have finance department, you still have people checking bills, it's still very human, labor intensive, in spite of being like something that has been done for hundreds of years. So carbon accounting, maybe since we will leapfrog a bit and have more automation, because we start with a blank state and we can put more technology from the start. Still, there will be human work involved, and it would be better if it's embedded in the organization of our client rather than mandates paid by the company, because they need this budget already to do the decarbonization actions instead of just being consultants.
And so what is the, if I could call it this way, the black box? What is happening within the Aktio black box? Or maybe it's not a black box, but you have those different stakeholders feeding data. What do you do with it, and what do you give back to the client as sort of the output, or the thing that they can consume?
Yeah, so basically when you're as a user, you're connecting on the platform, you have like an interface. Okay, I'm consuming energy. Is it gas? Yes. Which type of gas? This one. Which unit? I don't know, kilowatt hour. You add the amount, and then when you add the data, it automatically makes the calculation, because when you input the data, it's detailed enough so that we know what's the carbon equivalent, what we call an emission factor. So it means that there is actually more discussion before inputting the data to be sure that it's at the right level to be able to have a carbon equivalent. So, and then the calculation is fully transparent. It's just a multiplication between a few elements, and that's something super important, that this calculation can be exported in Excel. Is fully transparent, because you need to be able to compare your methodology to the other company in your sector, because people have to align, because you don't want to have different numbers for just methodological topics. That's not the way to go. So we try as much as possible not to have a black box, and the SaaS platform is here to ensure that you have this workflow of identifying who should be in charge, which data is provided by who, how precise is it, do we need to get into more details. So that's the value of the software, and it's in just one place. It's not like scattered across a lot of Excel files. So that's the way it works. It's not magic. It's just something that's why you need to find the right level between service and support and talking to customers and streamlining, having processes and something on the SaaS. And you have, the more clients are used to the topic, the more it can be on the SaaS. But at the beginning, you need a human touch. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Maybe that's where you were going with. That's just the first part. What is the nature of the conversation that you observe when your clients have been able to do all this, and then they have this view of this estimation of where does our emission footprint comes from? Do you observe then a discussion about how do we improve this, or is that okay? We've now ticked the box. Let's go back to business as usual.
We obviously have a selection bias in our clients, I would say. If they work for us, they also work for us because they know that we never do just the measurement, but we always prepare the action plan to define reduction actions. And that's actually the second part of identifying. So that's where a SaaS can also provide something compared to a consulting company. We productize a bit this part because each time we encounter a new sector, a new topic, a new challenge to decarbonize, we add to our database, which has over 200 actions and many more, but we don't put all of them on our platform. You don't start from a blank state. You already have a list of ideas with concrete actions to reduce your emissions on all topics: IT, logistics, commuting, etc. And that's actually what makes the product sticky, because once you've calculated the carbon footprint, you can then define at a very fine level concrete reduction actions, and with people in charge, because you invited several users in the data collection. The guy who provided the data is also the one who will be working on the reduction action, because that's more interesting to do that than just gathering data and doing a calculation. Sure. And then the year after, you want to see how you evolved. And there's a whole topic on carbon trajectories where it's like it's dead for 1.5 degrees. There's no way we can do that. We can reach that. But every tenth of degrees is worth fighting for. And there are a lot of innovation, a lot of new business models, a lot of ways to be much more efficient in the way we are using energy. And this is something that is like bringing a lot of energy in the companies. If you stop at the measurement, everybody is depressed. If you then move to the action plan, then everybody is, okay, let's go and work on that. What
would be some examples of initiatives that you would recommend from Aktio?
There's still this organization part, which is first get people in charge of collecting the data and defining the actions across your sites / countries and organizations. So you have a matrix with carbon champions or ambassadors or whatever in charge of making this carbon strategy go live in the company. It's not just like a CSR department next to in the headquarters, but it should be much more a network of people working on the topic. So that's the prerequisite to have it work. And then we have like some clients that want to put a carbon budget on business travels for the teams with a quarterly reporting, so that as a manager of the team, you have to find ways to reduce your emissions. You take less plane. So either junior people take a plane at the beginning during the onboarding to see the team in India, or only the bus, but not both. And you have to find ways, because everybody will follow the rules to reduce the emissions related to business travel, for instance. And that's an initiative from a client which is quite pushy, actually.
There have been many fundraising announcements in the carbon accounting or carbon assessment space. I think we can count in probably 10 or more companies in that space, just to name a few, Sweep, Plan A, Sinai, Normative, and so on. So at the same time, it's a huge space. How do you think about the key vectors of differentiation that make basically that make it such that those players don't necessarily all compete with each other?
Yeah, the first point here is we are like in a blue ocean, like you have 0.05% of companies who are really measuring their scope 1, 2, and 3 emission with an actionable carbon strategy. Really, we are very early, unfortunately, I would say, on this market, because it should have been 30 years ago. The way we frame it is it's not the same type of product and service depending on the size of the company, like classical SOHO, SMB, corporate.
Yeah.
Then you have a different. You can be rather verticalized or have a broad offering, just like you can have CRM like Salesforce, which is for all companies, but then you have a Viva, which is just for healthcare, and both exist. So, well, both strategy can work, and then you can decide to be specialized on carbon or decide to cover other type of impact like biodiversity, etc. And then you have to make a decision whether you're just on the reporting side, which will be much more and more demanding with CSRD and a lot of regulations, or you want to have measurement and the implementation of the actions, and then you can go to like a project management tools like Trello and Notion. You could have a Trello and a Notion of carbon management. It could be a product in itself. And you have a question whether you're very much tech focused or whether you have more service in your business. And the last way to segment the market is whether you just at the corporate level or you try to have both product level footprint and the company level. So you have this multi-dimensional space. There's just not one strategy working. Just Aktio, for instance, we are just carbon. We are mid-sized companies across different sectors, but more the carbon intensive ones in Europe. And we are measurement plus action and strategy with a consulting business on top of when it's relevant. So that's already quite a lot, but we refuse to do a lot of things. No product level, no other impact, no automation as a first way to go in the market, etc., etc. So that's the way the market is moving, and we see that the position of the players is progressively getting clearer and clearer in terms of the size of the companies, the sectors, etc. That's going super fast, but still a lot of room to go actually.
One thing that you mentioned now that you focus, or at least at the margin, you focus more on carbon intensive players. Linking that back to the recommended actions, you mentioned business travel. Curious if you also recommend, maybe more kind of industrial level or production process level carbon reduction initiatives, such as, I don't know, you should switch from this type of material to this type of less carbon intensive material. Do you go into that as well when it comes to making recommendations?
Yeah, I don't know. For instance, we have a client in fleet management, so they own cars that they rent to people that are then putting themselves on Uber. So here the key question is at which pace you switch to full electric cars. Well, you need the first good baseline, and then we did the different scenarios following the Science Based Target Initiative, which is an international framework to define a strategy. And so we looked at different speed and looked at how much would it represent in terms of numbers of car to switch to full electric. And here you're just changing the core business of your company. Another example on like warehouses, you have a lot of topics on insulation, having ventilators, ensuring that you mix the air between the bottom and the top of the warehouse so that you don't overheat because heat goes on the top. So we actually have a network of partners to implement the actions because we are not the ones doing insulation and putting photovoltaic panels on the roofs. But we do connect our clients to these players on very specific topic to use heat from industrial processes, insulate, put renewable energies, etc. So we are doing, so those actions have much more impact because your client has much more energy inside the company, actually.
Yeah. I want to talk about the way you engage with customers without asking you to disclose your secrets. Um, Curious to hear what approaches are effective when it comes to getting new customers and then, or rather prospects, and then converting them into customers. What channels, what strategies, what messages? It would be good to hear a bit what you're learning from trying to do this every day.
Yeah. So we started on with more outbound email outreach. So you have two ways to start, either inbound and marketing or just sales and outbound. So we started with outbound because we wanted to ensure that there is a need for not just carbon footprints, which has been around for a decade or two, but for more autonomy and a SaaS platform to do it, which is a different thing. You could say, I don't care about the SaaS, I just do job to be done. I need a consultant or I just do it myself. So we did cold outreach with this approach, just targeting CSR managers because those will be the users of our platform. So that's how we started the company. Now we are adding more marketing, webinars, etc. Always on carbon and trying to focus more on the actions than just the regulation and the reporting details, because that's not doing a carbon footprint to measure. You do it to have a baseline to know where to work for the reduction. So you should not. That's what we try to have in our marketing messages, so that we reach clients which are interested in our approach, which is ensuring that you have a SaaS not just for measurement but also for the actions, and you have more engaged customers. So that's why I talked about this selection bias in our customer base. And then there's a few indirect channels that we are scaling now. One is traditional consulting company. We can just sell the SaaS and they do the consulting work. So that we have done with a dozen consulting company already, and this works well. Since we are former consultants, we know how to work with them. And we have also investment funds, which, as I said, they want to be sure that the companies they invest in are on the right side of the transition, so they can promote us because they're looking for an efficient way for their portfolio companies to measure their emission. So we go through the private equity firms.
When it comes to the team, I observed that you've grown to roughly 25, 30 employees without any external funding, at least not disclosed. What has been the profile of skills that you have needed so far, and what type of roles are you hiring for?
On the funding part, we just did a small seed, but we did not communicate on that. But we did have we were not like a pre-revenue funding company, so we started to have revenue early, just to clarify on that, because there's already a demand for this type of service, and the way to serve that is we hired, let's say, a bit less than half of our staff is actually carbon experts that deploy the solution in our clients, so that they are, let's say, autonomous the next year. We spend 2 to 5 times less support for the second carbon footprint than the first one. So we see that you have a huge productivity improvement from the first to the second carbon footprint. And then the second half of the company is half developers and half sales. So that's a typical structure, a bit more skewed towards customer success and expertise compared to other SaaS B2B companies. But that's because the topic is rather new and there's no silver lining in terms of integration and API to do the job. You still need to talk to people to get to the right data if you want to do a decent work.
Very clear. What are the key next steps, the key milestones that you're excited to work towards as a company as we approach the end of this, at the end of this show? I'd love to close it on that.
We are, growing fast in terms of number of clients, demand, a lot of renewals. So now the challenge for us is to have an operating model that doesn't break under the workload, both on the sales, the dev, and the customer success. So that's we don't
Good
want to have
problem.
everybody.
Good problem to have.
Good problem. But yeah, maybe there are like three topics. Let's say on sales, or three perspective on sales, dev, and customer success. On sales and marketing, it's scaling more through indirect partners and distribution channels through consulting companies. So that's the strategic priority for the next few years, because we know we can do it directly, but if we want to scale faster, that's the most relevant for us given our the way we work and our background. Then in terms of tech, it's a mix of ever improving, obviously the platform, especially on the having better workflows to ensure that in any case you track better the data till the point where our clients are mature enough to have direct API integration. So that's not that far away, but in SMB companies, APIs might not be the magic wand that helps. Yeah, it's not next year because they don't have the IT systems on that side in any case. And on customer success, the challenge is for the next years is to have like not just us but our clients being super expert on carbon, because we need our clients to be maybe not as expert as us, but at least in their company on what is the carbon footprint for their company. We need our clients to be as good as us so that they can be more autonomous. And this means what is the best way to scale that? How do you productize all your IP and share it to your clients so that they are trained? So we are doing partnerships with training schools, etc., to find the best way to scale also this training of the customer.
Laurent, thank you so much. It's super exciting. I have to say, I came into this with scratching my head about, how much do I believe that carbon accounting software sort of trigger change, and I come now out of this discussion a bit more optimistic, a bit more positive that it's the building block that then enables actions that can contribute to reducing energy consumption and footprint intensity. So it was amazing having you on the show. I hope that we can have you back in some time when we can discuss the new learnings and a bigger company.
Well, thanks a lot. And indeed, in an ideal world, we would not need carbon footprint because we would already know what to do in the critical path to reduce emission. Unfortunately and realistically, you still need to measure to know what happens, and people like to know the progress they do. So we will need to count carbon for a few decades.
Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Nathan.
You can find out more about Aktio on their website, aktio.cc. If you are inspired by their mission, check out their career page for their job openings. If you enjoyed this episode, follow us on your favorite podcast app and stay tuned for more insightful conversations with other inspiring climate tech founders.